In this video, I want to talk about the basic concept of privilege. Now, this concept has become fairly controversial in the last few years, particularly when you hear about people referencing things like white privilege. But it shouldn't be controversial. We should be able to understand that privilege exists all around us and begin to have sympathy and empathy with those who lack the privileges that we may enjoy. Here's a basic definition of what privilege is. Privilege is a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group. That's a basic dictionary definition that I ripped off the internet. So the idea here is that you have privilege if you enjoy some particular right or advantage or immunity as an individual or as a group that is not enjoyed by others. And here's a specific example: male privilege. As a male, a man enjoys certain privileges, rights, advantages, or immunities in virtue of being male that females do not experience. This came to me, I experienced an example of this, an interesting one, a few days ago when I was on LinkedIn, and a gentleman posted this on LinkedIn. He said, "It costs nothing to be nice to others. Be nice and smile at everyone you meet. You don't know what others are going through, and they may need that smile far more than you realize." Now, very nice advice, well-intentioned, no doubt. Go around and smile at people all the time without discrimination. This is the kind of advice that a man would give. Why? Well, because a man doesn't think in terms of potentially being placed under threat or making oneself potential subject for harassment simply in virtue of smiling at another person. Men have an immunity to being harassed simply in virtue of being smiling at somebody else. But if you are a female, if you're a woman, you place yourself at much greater risk of being harassed if you go around smiling at people. And the fact that this gentleman doesn't even consider that, I think, is just an example of his privilege. And I don't mean that to be derisive, derogatory of him. Again, I think what typically happens when you enjoy privilege, you don't reflect on the fact often that you are enjoying the privilege, and you don't reflect on the fact that advising other people to smile is not necessarily good advice. I would never tell my 20-year-old daughter to go around smiling at men all the time. If you do that, you're asking for trouble. Now, you might think I'm making too much of this, but I mean, this is a video that I would simply point us to, which came out some years ago. A young lady walked around the streets of New York and was filmed for hours. And repeatedly, men would compliment her and comment on her and expect that she would be expected to respond to them. And they'd make sexualized comments, they'd objectify her, they'd engage in harassing and abusive behavior simply in virtue of her walking around the streets. Now imagine if she started smiling at people along the way. How much more would that invite the unwanted attention and potential harassment of males? And it's because a man doesn't need to worry about that, that a man, in virtue of that, is enjoying a privilege that women often do not have because they are threatened or potentially placed into threat or peril in situations that a man would not. And they have to worry about things that a man does not have to worry about. So yes, there is such a thing as male privilege, and we as males, if we are males, we enjoy that. We experience it, whether we recognize it or not. I don't have to worry about smiling at other people. It's not a potential threat to me, or doesn't make me place me under increased threat of harassment. But it's not the case when it comes to women. And so that's the concept of privilege, and that's the concept of male privilege. Now, are there privileges one can enjoy in virtue of being a majority ethnic class or socioeconomic class or religious class or something else within society? Are there powers and privileges that one can enjoy, immunities that one can enjoy that others do not? I think clearly so. So I think if you are threatened or incredulous to the idea of privilege, yes, sometimes the card can be overplayed. But I think we all need to recognize that we experience some degree of privilege or lack of privilege. And so we can show greater empathy and sympathy with those who do not experience the privileges that we do. Now, the last thing I just want to slip in here as well is that I do believe that most people experience some degree of privilege. So for example, let's say that you are an ethnic dominant class within a society. then generally within that society, you could enjoy a privilege relative to that dominant ethnic class. That's very possible. But it is also possible that within that society, there may be enclaves like communities, neighborhoods, etc., in which a minority within the greater society is the dominant majority ethnic representation within that subcommunity, that enclave, or neighborhood or something. And within that context, the person from the majority class could lack privilege that the minority class enjoys within that enclave. And so once we recognize that, I think we can also begin to recognize that privilege is not just a simple binary thing, either you have it or you don't, but multiple people can have and simultaneously lack sets of privileges. And so the more that we recognize that, the more we realize it's not simply in a virtue of or a question of haves or have nots in an absolute sense, but a recognition that we're all in a continuum in terms of having and lacking certain privileges.